We all know a little something about abuse, either from secondhand or otherwise. Me personally, I've had many of the people who are closest to me in my life have dealt with abusive relationships, either from their family members or from a romantic partner. And on the not-so-secondhand side of things, I was involved in an 8-year emotionally abusive relationship for the formative years of my life. So, we all know a little something about abuse, one way or the other. We know that it is a power play, pure and simple. We know it is one person dominating their will over another. We know it is the abuser taking and taking and taking from their victim, and somehow their victim still feeling like they owe their abuser. Abuse can take many forms, and this is very important. It can happen to anyone, and that is why it is vital that we all know the warning signs. Hopefully this will be a refresher for some of you, and if this is some information that you don't already know, we'd like to be able to teach you something, because I cannot stress the importance enough of knowing this information.
Child abuse. Child abuse is where you put a child at harm in any way possible. There is emotional, there's verbal, there's physical, there's sexual. And physical is where they're either beaten or being bruised a lot. And sexual is where they're either being raped or molested. And verbal is when they're constantly being yelled at, constantly, crying and being sad. And emotional, which, I don't know, it kind of falls under verbal too. But emotional is just constantly just always being sad no matter what. Warning signs, they start changing the way they act. They become very abusive, and they become mean to other people. It doesn't just go away. It affects them. They become just not nice anymore. The aftermath of it, though, they can be traumatized. They think about suicide. They'll either run away. They'll become violent, like I said, drink or even do drugs. And when they start doing all that, then they start going to jail, and they don't live a very good life. And they end up on the streets and eventually die. Every 2 seconds, a child is abused. 5 out of every 6 cases of child abuse are unreported. So that means over half of what happens, there is things happen to children that shouldn't be, and reflecting onto them. I remember when I was little, my stepdad was very abusive drunk, and he would start putting his hands on my mom, and then since I don't know, I thought I could do something about it, I would try to stop him and hold him back, but I was so little that I couldn't do anything, so he'd just push me around, and so I couldn't do anything, and that really affected me. But since if you have the right head and you do something about it, then you can fix it. But if you don't do anything about it, what can we do?
An intentional, unwanted contact with an individual's body or something used to hurt an individual. Ladies and gentlemen, it is called physical abuse. Something that any of us should never, ever have to will, to want to do, or even consider doing. Number one, it's against the law. Number two, it's a principle thing if any of us have a conscience. And number three, it should be a moral thing. Something that we should never, ever get ourselves involved in or want to be a part of. As I've stated, an intentional, unwanted contact with an individual or something close or anything close to the individual's body. I have to say that repeatedly. You do not, number one, want to physically harm anyone That's just like you physically abusing your child, physically abusing someone who's elderly in your family, or physically abusing a dog even. Many of you have seen the cases of dog fighting. That's another subject. Now, this sign right here, ladies and gentlemen, it's funny, but it's not funny. This right here is the beginning of how physical abuse starts. For example, if I grabbed your arm and you told me to stop continuously, and I did not stop, ladies and gentlemen, that could very well be defined as physical abuse, because for one, she did not consent to me touching her. So why should I do it? Or why should either any one of you do it? Or if you know someone who's doing it, don't allow them to do that. Because number one, you become a part of what they're doing, and number two, you're accepting what they're doing. Next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the aftermath of physical abuse. As you can see, the elderly man hit in the head, eyes bruised up, bruised on his neck, bruised on his mouth, bruised around his nose. This is the aftermath of physical abuse. I have a short story that I would like to share with this class. I have a sister who was in a 6-year relationship with a young man. And every time you turn around, it's hitting, abusing, you name it, slapping, punching, pulling of the hair, scratching, even bite marks, you name it, the whole 9 yards. Me as a brother to my sister, all I can do is pray for my sister and talk to my sister and say, look, you deserve better than this. This is not something that you should want from a man or anyone. That went on for 6 years. One day my dad got his pistol, went to the house. The young man who she was with that was physically abusing her almost threw my dad over a railing, but it didn't happen. But I use that to say that if you have a family member or a friend who is going through such a tragic issue like that, please, please, please do not be afraid to help your friend, family member, or whomever it may be.
Okay, today I'm going to inform you guys about verbal abuse. Basically, verbal abuse can be generally defined as the consistent and regular demeaning of another using verbal weapons to gain dominance and control. It is often the precursor to all the other types of abuse, including emotional and physical violence. Additionally, a victim of verbal abuse is 80% more likely to have a stroke, 70% more likely to have heart disease, 60% more likely to have asthma, and 70% more likely to develop alcoholism. And the warning signs of an abuser are often withholding information, thoughts, feelings, countering, which is disputing the victim's thoughts, feelings, emotions, discounting, blocking and diverting. Accusing and blaming is most often the most frequently used tactic, which is accusing the victim of the abuse. And of course, judging, stalking, criticizing, trivializing, ordering, commanding, undermining, threatening, name-calling, and intense aggression and anger. When used consistently, verbal abuse can cause stress, humiliation, anger, and hurt, which consequently leads to physical and mental detrimental health effects. Oftentimes, our innate and instinctive coping methods are denial, avoidance, displacement, procrastination, rationalization, which is using logic to blame yourself, which is the most often tactic, and trivialization. Unfortunately, these are unhealthy, and some healthier coping mechanisms are, of course, psychiatric therapy, and sometimes medication is necessary, and exercise, journaling, meditation, and deep breathing also help.
Sexual abuse is
any action of a sexual nature taken against a person without their consent. This can be unwanted kissing, unwanted touching. This can be attempted rape. It can be, completed rape. Refusal to use contraception and any kind of prevention for STDs, because that's not respecting, another person's sexual boundaries. It can also include, not obtaining someone's consent and not, or making sexual advances to someone who can't give their consent because they're either too drunk, too high, they're asleep, or they just can't give you the consent. And even threatening or pressuring someone in sexual activity can count as sexual abuse. There are a lot of warning signs for sexual abuse, which is, fear in response to any reminder of the assault, say, insinuated rape on television or in a game or something, or on a book or anything along those lines. Anxiety and fear of not feeling safe or feeling comfortable in particular places or around particular people. And they can often feel very, very guilty for no apparent reason because they feel guilty for what's happening to them. They feel like it's their fault, so they feel guilt and a lot of self-hate. And that can turn into depression and anger and a lot of other issues. There's also loss of interest in sex, which can negatively impact any kind of relationship that does involve sex. Right. And there's long, long-lasting effects after any kind of sexual abuse. You're at a high risk of substance abuse, alcohol abuse. Both of those are used as escapism and trying to escape from the pain and remove yourself from the situation. Lack of trust for either a particular gender or a particular type of person because they remind you of your assailant. It can have a negative impact on any relationship you have in the future that is of a sexual nature because you feel so dirty and awful from that having been done from you that you just can't be intimate with anyone. It's very hard to be intimate with someone. And there's still a lot of lasting feelings of guilt and self-blame and self-hatred because of that pervasive feeling of that you've let someone do this to you or that you somehow deserve it. With tampering with contraceptives and refusal of any kind of protection, you can get STDs very easily this way. And those can last the rest of your life. And not to mention pregnancy. If you take that child to term, that's with you for the rest of your life. That's a constant reminder of that rape, or assault. So it can be very hard to deal with that child because they're a constant reminder. And they can have flashbacks if there's something in, as I said before, in any kind of media that reminds them of it. They can have flashbacks and relive that in their head. There's a huge emotional toll associated with sexual abuse, and emotional abuse is a category on its own.
Emotional abuse is considered the most elusive form of abuse and difficult to define because oftentimes it is such that neither the abuser nor the victim realize that they are in an abusive relationship. Emotional abuse is manipulation at its base. Emotional abuse has been said to be when an abuser hurts someone and then makes the victim feel bad for being hurt, makes the victim responsible for their emotions. One such instance, an example of emotional abuse, can actually be seen in William Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew, which is a comedy of his. There's one particular scene that always strikes a nerve when myself or many people I've found watch this scene. It is when Petruchio is taking his new bride Kate home to see her father, and she complains that the sun is in her eyes. And he says, "Nay, it is the moon in your eyes." And they argue, and he refuses to move until she admits, "Yes, it is the moon," or whatever it is you say. and this is an example of emotional abuse. It has also been called mental abuse or psychological abuse, and has been likened to brainwashing. It is the extent such that an abuser can impose their will over their victim, that they make their victim more like themselves and try and make the victim see the world the way that they do, or make the victim an extension of themselves. Some warning signs are, just general anxiety is the same as any kind of abuse, trust issues. An overly apologetic person might have developed the trait from a coping mechanism trying to stabilize the abusive party and trying to keep things calm. Always having to check back with the abuser is another sign that there might be an abusive relationship going on. Of not just, is it all right that I go out Saturday night, but, well, how do you feel about this? Well, I don't know how such and such feels about this. Or is it okay if I do this? Let me check back on such and such. Another thing is if a person has stated to be uncomfortable with certain behaviors or activities, and they find them, and you see them doing those things anyway at the behest of their abuser. This is a disregard for the victim's own personal opinions and morals, and for any kind of humanity of the victim, because the abuser, it's only about the abuser, there's no room for the victim's opinions and this sort of thing. The aftermath can go on for years. You can find people oftentimes with huge trust issues that have difficulty opening up because it is incredibly difficult to allow yourself to become vulnerable after you've been taken advantage of in this way. You don't want to present some, you don't want to talk about your feelings when your feelings have been thrown back in your face after so long. You don't want to allow someone else in that way. And you have difficulty forming friendships and other relationships after the fact because you don't believe that they're actually out for your benefit. They don't believe that they actually care about you. You're waiting for that catch. You're waiting for that moment when they say, I was just using you the whole time. And you're waiting, you're wondering what people want out of you. And on the other side, you can also have people who develop incredibly dependent personalities, where they can't function without another human being because they have been dominated for so long that they don't know how to deal with themselves and how to be an individual, that they need another person there just to stabilize themselves. You also, of course, have anxiety, low self-worth, and anxiety with it comes with a myriad of mental and psychological effects such as depression, ulcers, muscle tension, that sort of thing. As far as my own story, like I said, I was part of an 8-year emotionally abusive relationship that I did not realize was abusive until after I got out of it. It involved, I was 11, she was 12, we met online, and she was a very troubled child from the beginning. She liked looking up morbid pictures, for example, and, third-degree burns, people getting stabbed through their hands, things like that. And she took great pleasure in linking me to those images and tricking me into clicking links that I didn't want to see. So I was a squeamish child, and she would make fun of me for my reactions. There were quite a few times when she would dominate over me. I said that I was going out to dinner with a boyfriend, and she said, no, you can't do that because I'm the big sister and you're the little sister and I haven't had a boyfriend yet, so you just can't do that. My mother one time brought me home this book, and I was super excited about reading it, and I told her about it. And she said, no, that's a terrible book. Have you not heard things about it? It was the Da Vinci Code, and she was incredibly religious. And she was saying, you can't read that. How dare you? It's so horrible. And how dare you call yourself a Christian if you want to read this book? And I felt so ashamed that I hid it in the corner of my room, and I felt sick every time I looked at it. And to this day, I've still never read the book. There were instances of her testing me, like she said once that she was going to take care of her bully problem once and for all and conduct a school shooting, and then logged offline and I couldn't get a hold of her. And I panicked because I was about 12 or 13 at the time. And she logged back on later, was like, no, I was just kidding. I would never throw my life away that foolishly. That'd be stupid. I just wanted to see how you'd react. And she would test me in such ways quite frequently. In fact, later when we were romantically involved, when we were dating, there was one instance where she called me at 3 in the morning sobbing because something had happened. And I didn't answer my phone. I didn't hear it go off. I was asleep. And I panicked. And the next day I was so sorry because my girlfriend had needed me and I wasn't there for her. And I felt awful about it. So a couple days later, I get another call at 3 in the morning, and I wake up, and I have an early shift the next day. And she said, I just wanted to make sure that you'd pick up this time and that you wouldn't do that again. You can go back to sleep now. Of course, I had an awful shift the next day, but she just wanted to make sure that I would always be there for her and always have her back, like I'd never had it in the past. Like on all the occasions when she would be stressed out about a homework assignment that she hadn't left herself enough time to complete. So I had not rarely finished papers for her and not had time to complete my own homework, and my grades suffered as a result. I have papers on my computer still saved from research papers that I had to do for her. The most recent one was from April of 2012. And eventually she manipulated me in our romantic relationship because it was long distance and she couldn't deal without a physical aspect. She manipulated me into allowing her to sleep with another guy and made it sound like it had been my idea the whole time. Of course, I was very uncomfortable with this, but I tried to make the relationship work regardless. Until eventually she said, can we just not do this anymore? And that's how my 8-year abusive relationship ended, not with the victorious cry of a victim who would have no more, but with a yawn and a hand wave. And I had not realized until much later what I had gotten out of. Abuse can happen to anyone. Abuse takes many forms, and it is incredibly vital that you know exactly how to identify it, maybe help someone else that you love, or, God forbid, yourself. Thank you.